Why does Final Fantasy Mystic Quest suck? In the grand old year of 1992, Squaresoft encountered a problem. Their comically sized money pile was only big enough to suffocate 3 fully grown cows instead of 4. The cause of this problem was that their games were not doing as well in the Western markets as they were in Japan, and they concluded that the reason for this was that the average American audience was too stupid to understand and appreciate the nuances of the RPG genre. And you can think this is extremely cynical, but you have to admit that they're not 100% wrong. So in a marketing strategy, Square decided to create a game that would introduce newcomers to the genre and also generate interest in their own products. Not only would this game have simplified RPG mechanics, a stripped-down story, and a lower difficulty curve, but it would also borrow mechanics from the action-adventure genre. The end result was Final Fantasy Mystic Quest, one of the most embarrassing games ever, because they basically took an RPG, beat it over the head with a shovel a few times, and then shat it out all over the Western markets. Now, I usually like to talk about why games are good on this channel, because I think it's better to give attention to games that deserve it, and I think we can learn a lot from looking at what makes these games good. But I also think that there's value in looking at what makes games bad, and that we can still learn something from finding out how these games failed and learn what not to do in a game. And Mystic Quest definitely has plenty of examples of what not to do when making an RPG. Now, some of you might be saying to yourself, "Hey, there's no need to judge this game so harshly. You just said it's just a dumb marketing gimmick to get people in RPGs, so no need to take it seriously, right?" Alright, 2 points. 1. That's a bullshit argument. They sold this as a game, so I'm going to judge it as a game. 2. Fine. This game says it's bringing entry-level players into RPGs, then I'll also judge how good of a job it does at introducing people to the RPG genre. Okay, so before we begin, I have to say, it's kind of hard for me to organize my thoughts on this one, since the entire game is just a clusterfuck of everything being horrible at once. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take you guys through the game and bring up how it sucks as it's relevant. So at least none of you will have to play this game, and you can all just suffer vicariously through me. So the game starts with a JRPG guy going to a JRPG mountain because his JRPG village has been destroyed, and he finds a JRPG expository character who tells him that he is the JRPG hero who must find the 4 JRPG things to save this JRPG world from a nameless JRPG evil, and then they're attacked by a monster for no reason. Here's where the game has its introduction of the combat system, and it's just awful. And I don't just mean this one instance of it, I mean all of the combat throughout the entire game is just horrible. And there are so many things that are awful about it that I almost don't know where to start. But mainly all of it boils down to the fact that the combat is just so fucking boring. First off, the game doesn't really let you do all that much in combat. You can either hit the enemy with your weapon or pick from like 4 spells to cast, and that's about it. And because the game doesn't give you any options, there's no room for variation in how you play or ability to make any strategy, which just leaves the player completely unengaged as they hit the enemy over and over again until they die. I get that the game wants to simplify the RPG, but the way they go about it just completely disconnects the player from the game. Secondly, the combat is too damn easy, so even if you could make a strategy, you don't need one. It doesn't take much thought or effort to beat the game. And again, I know this was the game's intention, but the way it does it removes all sense of tension from the combat and just makes the player completely uninterested in what's going on in the game. And lastly, the game has a passive combat system, meaning that the whole turn is planned and then played out. Now, passive systems aren't automatically bad. There are a lot of RPGs that use a passive system well, because usually their combat involves some amount of strategy, and a passive system then creates tension as you have to watch to see if your plans will work. But as I've explained, Mystic Quest doesn't have any strategy, so a passive system just makes the combat that much more boring, because now half of the combat is just you watching as the action happens. And it doesn't even make sense why they made it with a passive system, since most of the Final Fantasy games have an active system, not a passive system. Yes, the first 3 games in the series had passive systems, but 2 and 3 were never released in the West. Final Fantasy IV, which was released prior to Mystic Quest, had an active system, as did Final Fantasy V, which was released around the same time as Mystic Quest, but just not in the West. And if you believe that this game was made to get new players ready for RPGs, then Final Fantasy VI would be the game that this game is getting you ready for. But that doesn't make any sense, since Final Fantasy VI also has an active combat system, so I just can't think of any reason why they made this game with a passive combat system. So to recap, combat is just you staring brain dead at the screen while you mash A until it's all over, but it's fine that combat is horrible because it's only going to be the thing that you're going to spend most of your time doing in the game. So JRPG guy goes to the forest area, but there's a progression blocker in his way, so he needs to go find this hippie chick to vape with the trees or commune with them or what the fuck ever. This is when we first get proper control of the game, and my next point is going to be kind of hard to understand unless you've played it, but the overworld controls feel really awkward in this game. You move at a painfully slow pace, and all of the movement is very grid-like. This isn't that horrible on its own. This was pretty much how all RPGs were at the time, so we can't fault the game too much for this. But this does create all sorts of problems when the game tries to combine its action-adventure elements. You never feel like you have the control that you want or would have in other action games, and it just ends up feeling clunky or stilted whenever you have to swing your weapon or jump. Oh yeah, jumping! Everybody made a big deal of the fact that you can jump in this. The game even made special notice of it in the beginning. And I'll admit, that got me interested. The ability to jump is probably the mechanic that'll get me interested in an RPG the fastest. It means that you're making use of an entire dimension that most games usually don't include, and it can lead to some pretty cool level designs. But too bad, because Mystic Quest fucks this up too. The ability to jump adds absolutely nothing to the game. You see, in games that are all about jumping, like your Mega Mans or your Marios, jumping has some depth to it. It requires some skill to be successful at. It's all about timing and positioning and aiming your jumps. But not in Mystic Quest. You press the jump button and move exactly one tile forward every time, always. There's no timing or aiming or pits to fall in, and you can only really jump off specific edges that the game wants you to jump off of. And the game rarely ever uses it to make any interesting level designs. It's just used as another way of moving forward, except instead of holding forward on the D-pad, you're pressing a button, so you just feel like you're doing something. But in reality, it doesn't add anything. It's just something they put in the game, so it can say that it has it in it, so that you'll buy it. So in order for JRPG Guy to get to JRPG Girl in JRPG Town, he has to go through the world map and oh my god, this is the worst thing ever! I just said that having the ability to jump in the overworld is the fastest way to get me interested in an RPG. Well, the quickest way to make me hate an RPG has to be having a world map that's like this and just a shitty Mario stage select screen. RPGs are famous for having these big open worlds that you can explore and move around in. They make you feel like you're in a real world and that you're going on some grand adventure. So taking all that away and replacing it with literally nothing is the worst thing you could do ever. My uncle was a truck driver, and he always said to me, "Hey Jimmy, do you want to see all the hitchhikers I've killed?" But I knew he meant that getting there is half the journey. And by taking away the process of getting there, you're turning an epic adventure into just a list of chores you have to complete. Okay, I need to go clear out this dungeon, pick up my dry cleaning, get this crystal, and oh, I need eggs too. Something else that's a minor detail but still really bothered me was how the area-to-area transitions operate in this game. When you leave an area, pretty much everything resets. All the monsters are respawned, all the items are replaced, and any progress you have made is undone. Not only is this easily exploitable to get infinite items and effectively devalue the rest of the pickups in this game, but it's made much worse because the exits of the area have no real clear indicators. You just sort of walk off and arbitrarily exit. So it's way too easy to accidentally leave an area, reset all the progress you made, and just want to kill yourself. But on the opposite end of that spectrum, when you are finally ready to leave an area, you get lost because you can't find the exits because you don't know where they are. I mean, come on guys, this shit is not up to fire code. So after JRPG Guy goes through the JRPG Forest, JRPG Girl has to leave for no JRPG reasons, but we never really needed her in the first place, so we continue on our quest. Along the road, we find this, a battleground. It's just a stack of 10 battles in a row. I assume since there's no enemies on the world map that this is the game's replacement for grinding. Never mind the fact that you could just grind by exiting and re-entering an area over and over again. Also, since it says that it has 10 battles, that tells me that there's some sort of reward at the end for completing it. Like new equipment, or magic, or items that we can use. Oh boy, I'm so excited. I can't wait to see what I get. Only 2 more battles left. Oh man, I wonder what I'm gonna get. Oh, last one. Oh, what did I get? What did I get? What did I get? What? What? That's it? I got nothing? What the fuck? What's the point of these then? I guess these really are just grind spots, but they're still useless because I never went to another one and I still beat the game easily. So these are just here to waste your time and pad out the game length. Whatever, fuck this, I'm out. So we meet my new friend and he's extorting money from us like a hero would, and we have to go to this sand dungeon place over here. This is the first proper dungeon of the game, and it sets the precedent of the level design in all these areas just being horrible. So here's the first room of this place. How it's supposed to go is you either go right or left, have to fight these monsters to get through, and can also fight an additional monster to get an item. But if you go forward, you're pushed by the sand into these monsters and have to fight one of them to get through. Or, you could just jump over this box, still get an item, and just leave without having to fight any monsters at all. And this doesn't feel like I found a solution to an obstacle, this feels like I found an exploit that the developers didn't consider. It honestly feels like they forgot that the player could jump. But that doesn't make any sense. You'd think they remembered that they could since they made such a big deal out of it. And there are a lot of moments like this throughout the entire game, where there's some sort of obstacle you have to get past, but there is a glaring flaw that you can just go through with little to no consequences. And this is just awful. It destroys any sense of challenge there is, or satisfaction that you could get in passing an obstacle, because I didn't do anything special, I just walked forward. I mean, in heist movies, the big payoff isn't Tom Cruise going, "Oh hey guys, they just left the front door open, we can just go through there." So eventually we reach a roadblock, and my new friend gives me some bombs to blow it up. Now, I've used a lot of explosives in games, and in real life, and I can safely say that these are the worst I've ever used. Yeah, they do their job and blow stuff up alright, but it's what you're blowing up that sucks. You see, in other games that use bombs like this, the challenge comes from finding and identifying what you have to use your bombs on, like when a wall has cracks in it or is a different color or whatever. The point is it requires you to be perceptive to find what you have to use your bombs on, and it rewards you when you do find them. But none of that is in Mystic Quest. The bombs are just used to blow up anything that's blocking your progress, and there's no consistency in what you have to bomb. If there's something blocking your way, you just bomb it. That's it. No thought required. I have the same problem with the bombs as I do with the jumping. They're both just a means of moving forward. Really, the bombs are just a convoluted way of opening a door. But whatever, eventually we reach the boss, beat his butt and get the thing, and then we have to do it all over again to get the next thing. So we head off to Area 2, where we meet this chick from Friends, and she needs help melting the ice caps or whatever, so we head off to this ice cave. This is where we're introduced to the wall climbing mechanic, and in order to do it, we need to have this claw thing equipped. This works alright, I guess, but the problem is that eventually we come to this bombable door. So I'm like, oh, okay, I gotta switch back to the bombs now. So I go into the menu, open up the weapon screen, and equip the... What? What's wrong? Why can't I equip the bombs? What? So it turns out in order to change which weapon you have equipped, you have to use the L and R buttons to cycle through them. And this actually makes a lot of sense for this game, because you are changing which weapon you have equipped a lot. And it would be cumbersome if you constantly had to open up a menu to do so. And you can also change weapons mid-battle, which is kind of neat, I guess. But the reason I'm bringing up this mechanic is because it highlights two major problems I have with this game. The first is that Mystic Quest is terrible at explaining how to play itself. You're never told that you need to use L and R to change weapons, and you're never told much anything else. The only real tutorial you're ever given is when the game tells you how to jump. The rest it kinda lets you just figure out on your own. Now I usually like this in games, but it doesn't make much sense for a game that's supposedly all about teaching beginners how to play. To be fair, a lot of this is explained in the strategy guide that was sold with this game. So I guess if you're playing with a strategy guide, my last point is kind of unsubstantiated. But I didn't have a guide with me while I was playing this game, so when something worked in a different way than it usually does in an RPG, of course I got stuck. And this brings me to my second and probably more important point, which is that Mystic Quest is terrible at explaining how to play an RPG. Neither the game nor the guide ever do a good job at explaining basic RPG concepts like experience or equipment or how the stats affect the game. And playing Mystic Quest gives you a very false impression of what an RPG is supposed to be. This is due to how different the game is compared to most RPGs. I mean, have you ever played an RPG where you change weapons like this and not through an equipment screen? And being different is something I would usually praise a game for, but not in this case because it works against the game's intentions. The elements it changes to get new players into RPGs actually make it harder for new players to get into RPGs. The game might have been better off if they had just removed the action-adventure elements and focused on explaining basic RPG concepts. Here's how I would do it. Have it so each area gradually introduces a new idea. The first area could just be an empty space to let the player get used to the movement controls. Then, the next area introduces basic combat and the ideas of experience and leveling up. The next area could be all about explaining equipment and the impact that the stats have. You could do this by giving the player a weapon with a high attack but a low speed, and then a weapon with a low attack but high speed, and let them feel the difference it has. The next area could teach them about different status effects and the importance of healing. Then have an area that's all about magic and the different elemental effectiveness. And the final area can be a challenge where the player has to combine everything they learned in order to succeed. Mystic Quest could have handled its concept much better, but it didn't, and that's one of the major reasons why I think this game is bad. I want to clarify that I don't hate this game because it's dumb or kiddie. I think it's bad because it fails in its concept. But, whatever. The next place we go to involves pushing these blocks in order to make platforms that we can jump across. It's a neat way to use the jumping mechanic, but it has a lot of problems with it. For one, you can only push the blocks, you can't pull them, so you could get a block stuck in a corner and be screwed. And two, the blocks move way too fast, so it's way too easy to get a block stuck in a corner and be screwed and have to reset the entire area and start from scratch. Alright, so I usually don't talk about graphics because I think they're the part of the game that matters the least, but I have to say that the graphics in Mystic Quest are just awful, and not for the reasons you'd think they are. Yeah, sure, it's super low quality, the art sucks, there's almost no animation, and then this happens. I don't know what this is, but I know it's horrible, and it happens every time. But the reason I think Mystic Quest's graphics are terrible is because they fail at conveying information to the player. That's the only real job of graphics, is to convey non-verbal information, so it's pretty bad if you mess that up. Here's an example. Look at this moving sand. What do you think will happen when I walk on it? If you said that it would push me in the exact opposite direction that it's moving, then you're right, but you probably didn't because that's stupid. And then there's this thing. What is this? Is it a switch? Am I supposed to bomb it? Is it just for decoration? No, it's a door that you have to open with this switch, but it's hard to tell what either of these things are, and the game's never shown you what these are before now, so you can get to this point and be totally confused at what you're supposed to do. And the problem that this block puzzle has is that the perspective in this game is all messed up. You can't really tell how the position of the block relates to the location of the platform. This isn't too bad when you're going left or right, but when you're going vertically, it's really hard to tell where you have to push the block. Which is really bad because, as I said, if you mess up, you have to start all over again. I had to do measurements and test jumps just to figure out where I needed to place it. So eventually we end up in this ice temple place, and its big gimmick is that you have to hit these switches with your sword, except that the game never really tells you that you can do that, and these statues don't look anything like switches, so how are you supposed to know they're switches? And that doesn't make any sense to operate switches with a sword when you could use, oh, I don't know, your hands? So you're uninformed of this unintuitive mechanic that is completely unnecessary. I don't know why the game makes us use a sword to flip these switches. We could have just used our hands, see? It's easy! I think my problem with all of the action-adventure mechanics in this game is that none of them add anything to the game. Because all of the actions they're used for are just things you'd be able to do in a regular RPG by just interacting with objects, like hitting a switch or opening a door or sometimes just walking forward. But they make you press an extra button so you feel like you're doing something, when in reality you're not. I mean, look at this room. Is there anything being added to the game by making me cut down these mushrooms to move forward? These mechanics exist just to create the illusion that this is an action game, so that the game can say it is, so that you'll buy it. So we accelerate global warming and destroy an ecosystem, and then we head off to get the fire thing, and along the way we meet this sandwich guy who we need to help us for some reason to get the fire thing. And if you think I'm cutting out a bunch of story details, I'm not really. This game holds true to its promise of having a bare-bones story, but it doesn't really do much to help the game. In fact, it might hurt it. Mystic Quest has what's called an excuse plot, where the story only exists to justify the situations that are occurring. Usually games have stories like this because the gameplay is enjoyable enough for it to be able to stand on its own. However, I hope you understand by now that playing Mystic Quest is anything but enjoyable, so the game not having any story really just makes you apathetic to whatever is going on. You see, RPGs and Final Fantasy games in particular are famous for having these big, elaborate, and interesting stories. They make you care about the characters and the world that they're in, and they do this because, admittedly, the gameplay can be a bit dull and dry at times, and the game needs something that can keep the player interested and invested in the game. So when you take away those story elements, all you're doing is taking away the reason for the player to care about the game. I feel like this is another example of this game trying to be an RPG that will appeal to a lot of people without understanding why RPGs appeal to people in the first place. So me and Sandwich go free his dad and then head off to go get the fire thing. I gotta tell you, I actually kinda like Sandwich. I mean, he's a classic tank. Just look at how much health he has. He's got like, Hold on, I can find this health. It's right. No, this isn't the menu I wanted. What am I looking at? Oh god, this game's interface is just terrible. Okay, first offender, the health bars. Apparently in the West, we're too stupid to read numbers. I get that they wanted to make it easier to gauge the relative amount of health a character had left, but these health bars make it impossible to accurately tell the exact amount of health a character has. Because for some weird reason they decided to make these pips here equal 40 health, and not a number that makes sense that would be easy to read, like 50 or 100. And yeah, I know you can change these in the options screens, but it's like this way by default, so that means it's how it's supposed to be. And then there's the magic system. Instead of giving you a point pool that all of your magic consumes, you're given a separate amount of charges for each type of magic. Again, I get why they did this. They wanted to make it easier to tell how many more times you could use a spell, but this messes up the balance a lot. Now when you get a new, better spell, all of your old spells become instantly useless because all of the spells cost the same to use, so you just want to use the best one you can. Maybe they could have given separate charges to the individual spells so that they could better balance it out, but oh, I guess that would have been too much work. And in general, these menus are just ugly and confusing. I mean, look at this mess. And a lot of these are just useless because you can't change your equipment or manage your inventory or do much else other than just look at them. These menus only really exist because other RPGs have menus in them, and this game still wants to say that it's an RPG. So me and Sandwich head over to the fire dungeon to get the fire thing, and since this place has by far the highest density of them, I think it's a good time to talk about the encounters in this game. And admittedly, this is one of the most moderately not terrible things about this game. First good thing is that they're not unseen. All of the encounters are seen on the overworld, which is good because it lets the player know when a battle is occurring and why it's occurring, and it lets them prepare for it. And also, the battles have no randomness to them. All of the encounters are placed beforehand, and they don't even move, which is really great because it lets the pacing of the game be better controlled, and the game can be better balanced because the player will have a minimum XP amount. Unfortunately, that's all the positive there are to it. The placement of the encounters is all over the place. Sometimes it can be really sparse, and other times it can be really dense, with no real reasoning for why. This can throw the pacing all over the place, and it just kind of feels sloppy at times. Also, I don't know if this is just me, but on the overworld it can be hard to tell whether or not an encounter is just a regular enemy or a boss. But hey, they do bring back old bosses as regular enemies, which is a cool way in an RPG to show how much your character has gotten stronger. Oh, wait, they only did it so they could reuse the sprites because they didn't want to make new ones. And the most disappointing part is that they missed the opportunity to let you use your abilities in the overworld to gain some sort of advantage in battle, kinda like you can do in a Mario RPG. And I guess this was made before the Mario RPGs, so I can't hold it against them too much, but now that I'm thinking about it, if you want to see the concepts of this game done well, then you should go play a Mario RPG game. So me and Sandwich get the fire thing and fix all the problems, and then we head off to the wind place, but Sandwich and I get separated, and then my new friend shows up, but then he has to leave because the Deku tree here only accepts virgin sacrifices, so JRPG Girl gets to come back. As you've probably noticed, the party system works differently in this game than it does in other RPGs. Instead of having 3 or 4 or 5 party members like you would in most other RPGs, Mystic Quest limits you to only 2 party members, JRPG Guy and whoever else he's bringing along. I guess that they thought limiting the amount of characters you had to control would simplify the game, but it just ends up making it worse. You see, usually in an RPG, you have so much variation in how you can play, and the reason they usually have so many encounters is to give you an opportunity to experiment with different characters, equipment, and strategies, so Mystic Quest limiting the party count to 2 really restricts what you're able to do in combat even more, and it makes combat all the more meaningless and boring. And by default, you don't even control the second character in your party. Again, I know you can change this in the settings and that there's even a dedicated button for it, but this is how it is by default, so this is probably how it was meant to be. And this is probably another form of the game's hand-holding. They take away half the battle responsibility from you and give it to a semi-competent AI, and you're probably supposed to learn what to do by watching them. But they could have done this better. They could have given you in the beginning a really powerful companion that would have shown you what you're supposed to do in battle, and then as the game goes on, give you a progressively weaker and weaker companion that would gradually shift the battle responsibility over to you, which would force you to get better, instead of what they did, which is just giving you the most powerful companion at the end, which just makes it a total cakewalk. You might have also noticed that the NPC party members will almost always have a higher level than you. You can say that this is more the game's hand-holding, because now you always have an ultra-powerful member on your team, but I actually think that this is just because they were too lazy to make an experience or leveling system for the other characters.
Are you noticing a theme with this game?
So some win shenanigans happen in order for us to get to the win place to get the win thing, and as soon as we get there we see the boss, and I feel genuine hope in my heart that this area will be quick and painless and won't be a nightmare like all the others, and oh god, why do you taunt me? So a big reason why playing this game is so painful is that all the levels are goddamn labyrinths, and poorly made ones at that. You spend most of your time wandering around not knowing where you are or where you're supposed to go. Everything looks the same, and the battles are so mind-numbing that it's way too easy to lose your train of thought and get lost. I appreciate that they tried to make the levels non-linear, but this is just taking it to the opposite extreme. So we finally get all 4 of the JRPG things and we can go save the world, I guess. There's some stuff with the boat or whatever, but I gotta be honest, I stopped paying attention a long time ago. I'm really just going where GameFAQs tells me to go. So we go to the evil guy's place because the game needs a conclusion, and honestly, this is probably the least horrible place in the game. The final dungeon has you climbing this tower to reach the final boss, and each of the floors you have to go through revisits the concepts of the 4 major dungeons, but they also add new twists to include the new equipment and abilities you might have gotten, like the grappling hook and the ability to throw bombs, and these have some genuinely interesting level design in them. The earth floor reintroduces sliding sand and using bombs to blow stuff up, but it actually does these things well this time. You're not just blowing up anything that's blocking your progress. In fact, you can impede your progress by blowing up the wrong things, so you actually have to think about what you're blowing up. And it also combines the mechanics that were introduced after the Earth Temple in a way that feels satisfying. And also the fucking sand is moving in the right direction. How did they fuck that up in the first place? I'm still angry about that! The water and fire areas are the only areas in the game where the jumping mechanic feels like it matters. You see these intersections here? The center tile is removed, so you can only cross it by jumping. This means you can't change directions in them, and you have to figure out a way around it. It's not much, but it's kind of neat. And by no means are these areas perfect or amazing. They still have plenty of the same problems that the rest of the game has. They're just barely competent. And maybe this game has lowered my standards so much that this small amount of competency seems like a miracle to me now. I mean, except for the wind floor, this shit is still fucked. The perspective is all over the place and it's still confusing as hell to get through. And finally, after all of our trials, we get to what is undoubtedly the best part of this game. No, not this boss fight. It sucks. All of the combat sucks. Remember? That was the first thing I talked about. But this music is amazing! Just listen to it! The best thing this game has going for it is that the soundtrack is slightly above average, with some actually amazing tracks like this one. The composer of this game deserves so much credit for the job he did. He may or may not have known how much of a piece of shit this game was going to turn out to be, but either way, that didn't stop him from putting his all into this game, and that's just so fucking respectable. I don't know enough about music to be able to talk about the specifics of what makes this track great. I just know that it rocks. The reason I got interested in playing this game in the first place was because I heard this song, and when this song was playing in the game, I almost enjoyed playing it. I mean, I didn't because this battle was still crap, but that just shows the power music can have in games, and it shouldn't be overlooked. So that's the end of Mystic Quest. I mean, I guess there's some other stuff that happens at the end or whatever, but who the fuck cares about that anymore? So since this game is all about teaching people how to play RPGs, I hope you're paying attention because it's pop quiz time. Question 1. What did we learn about RPGs from playing Mystic Quest? Well, Mystic Quest taught us that RPGs are soul-sucking experiences with embarrassingly easy and mind-numbingly boring combat, pointless action-adventure elements, and horribly confusing graphics, interfaces, and level design, with absolutely no story, style, or charm to make anybody care about the game. The thing I object to most with this game is the idea that it's some sort of educational tool to get new players into RPGs, and I hope you've realized by now that it does anything but that. And the reason I think that it fails at that is because this game is so different from most RPGs that it gives you a false impression of what an RPG is supposed to be. It's like if you were trying to learn how to fly a plane, but instead of playing a flight simulator, you play a farming simulator. It's just not what it's supposed to teach you. It almost feels like this game doesn't want to be an RPG. It wasn't really marketed as an RPG, it doesn't have many of the features you'd expect to find in an RPG, and it has a bunch of mechanics that don't really fit in an RPG. It feels like this game is trying to be more like a Legend of Zelda game than a Final Fantasy game. I mean, if they're trying to get more people into the genre, then why do they feel like they have to create a false image of what that genre is? I mean, it almost feels like false advertising to me. I could never really make sense of any of this while I was playing the game, and the only real conclusion I can draw now is that Square didn't think a traditional RPG would sell very well in the West, so they changed the game so that it would appeal to a wider audience, so that it would sell better and hopefully popularize the Final Fantasy franchise in the West. But then that would mean that this game isn't about trying to get more people to play games in the RPG genre, it's about trying to get more people to play games made by Square. But it failed at that too. Mystic Quest was a commercial failure, and the first Final Fantasy game to ever really become popular in the West was Final Fantasy VII. Oh, what do you know? When you make an actual good game with heart and thought put into it, instead of trying to scam people to make as much money as possible, people will actually buy your game. I mean, golly gee, who'da thunk of that? I mean, how are you supposed to figure that one out, you stupid motherfuckers? I've had enough of this goddamn game! The reason I personally don't like this game is that there's just an enormous amount of cynicism behind it. This isn't some sort of educational tool to introduce new players to a genre, it's a marketing strategy made by a company trying to break into a new market. Square felt they had to dumb down their product in order for Western audiences to understand it, but no matter how dumb Square thinks I am, at least I'm not dumb enough to make Mystic Quest. Oh hey, you're still here? That's weird, the video's over, you can leave now. Nope, still around? Alright, that's cool I guess. Hey, thanks for watching this whole video. It took me way too long to make, and I hope I can start making these faster pretty soon. If you watch this whole thing, then that probably means you have opinions on your own, either on this game or something else, so please feel free to share those in the comments below. I actually really like hearing what other people have to say. And if you're still watching this, then that means you're like me and don't really care how you spend your free time. So if you want to see a video where I talk about a game that I actually think is good, then check out this video I made about Earthbound. And if you want to see more videos like this in the future, then you could subscribe, I guess? No, don't do that, that's a dumb idea. So anyway, once again, thank you for watching, and I hope to see you guys again real soon, or maybe not, or whatever, who knows. Bye.